Before we tackle about the characteristics of good governance, let us watch first the example. Effectiveness and efficiency. Good governance means that processes and institutions produce results that meet the needs of society while making the best use of resources at their disposal. The concept of efficiency in the context of good governance also covers the sustainable use of natural resources and the protection of the environment. So, the main strategy of having effective and efficiency governance is to relate to the functioning of the public sector focused on accountability and scrutiny. The next one is accountability. Accountability is a key requirement of good governance. Not only governmental institutions but also the private sector and civil society organizations must be accountable to the public and to their institutional stakeholders. It refers to an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility for one's actions. When individuals are accountable, they understand and accept the consequences of their actions for the areas in which they assume responsibility. When we say strategic vision, having a good governance as a leader, he must have a vision for long term. There is also an understanding of the historical, cultural, and social complexities in which that perspective is grounded. Next is the World Bank, on the other hand, cites four dimensions of governance which are public sector management, meaning covers such aspects of management as productivity management and management of human, financial, and other sources. There are so many examples of public sector like police, military, public roads, public transit, and public education, and so on. But are they independent of the government and may have sources of revenue in addition to public funding. The second one is accountability. Like what I've said, it is refers to an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility for one's action. Example, when an employee is given the task of making sure a project goes right and knows she will be blamed if it doesn't, she can also be said to have accountability for the project. Third, legal framework for development. It is a broad system of rules that governs and regulates decision-making, agreements, laws, and so on. Lastly, transparency and information. When we say transparency, it is the rights and the means to examine the process of decision making, while the information, it is the news or knowledge received or given. There are four basic elements of good governance according to ADB or Asian Development Bank. First is accountability. It is imperative to make public officials answerable for government behavior and responsive to the entity from which they derive their authority. This may be achieved differently in different countries or political structures depending on the history, cultural milieu, and value systems involved. Next is participation. It is often related to accountability but not necessarily so in representative democracies, where citizens participate in government through the electoral process. Public officials are indeed accountable ultimately to the electorate. This may not be the case, however, in other political systems. For all economists, though, the benefits of participatory approaches can be considerable. These include improved performance and sustainability of policies, programs, and projects, as well as enhanced capacity and skills of stakeholders. For example, contributing and receiving resources, participants agree that items like helping others and voluntary work because they involve serving a useful purpose. Third, predictability. It refers to the existence of laws, regulations, and policies to regulate society, and their fair and consistent application. The importance of predictability cannot be overstated, since without it, the orderly existence of citizens and institutions would be impossible. And the importance of rules-based systems for economic life is obvious. They are essential component of the environment within which economic actors plan and investment decisions. And last, transparency. An example of transparency is the fact that you can see through glass the quality or state of being transparent and describes a situation that occurs when companies openly communicate important information to investors and shareholders. Next is the basic elements of good governance. First, accountability means making public officials answerable for government behavior and responsive to the entity from which they derive authority. And the key dimensions, establishing criteria to measure performance of public officials, institutionalizing mechanisms to ensure that standards are met. And specific areas of action is public sector management, public enterprise management, public financial management, civil service reform. The second one is participation. Third, predictability. And last, transparency. Let us proceed to the Institute on Governance 5 Principles of Good Governance. The UNDP principles and related UNDP text on which they are based, the Institute on Governance has identified 5 principles of governance, using as basis the UNDP's indicators of good governance. First is legitimacy in voice. Everyone has the right to speak up so that we can know and share the opinion of each one, especially when it comes to formulating plan to know what to do and what not to do. Second, direction. Leaders and the public have a broad and long-term perspective on good governance and human development. Along with the sense of what is needed for such development, there is also an understanding of the historical, cultural, and social complexities in which that perspective is grounded. Supposedly, the strategy to have a good governance must be as a leader and it has a vision for the long term. Third, performances. Institutions and processes try to serve all our stakeholders. Effectiveness and efficiency. Processes and institutions produce results that meet needs while making the best use of resources. For example, at work, if you want to be promoted to a higher position, you need to give your best so that they can see if you deserve to be promoted to that position. Next is accountability. Decision makers in government, the private sector, and civil society organizations are accountable to the public, as well as to institutional stakeholders. This accountability differs depending on the organization. and whether the decision is internal and external. When individuals are accountable, they understand and accept the consequences of their actions for the areas in which they assume responsibility. And the last is fairness. All men and women have opportunities to improve or maintain their well being. Rule of law, legal frameworks should be fair and enforced impartially, particularly the laws on human rights. The quality of treating people equally or in a way that is right or reasonable. And that's all. Thank you.